What's up, comic book community? My name is Joe, and this is 360 Comics. Earlier this week, I bought a collection from a guy who worked in the magazine distribution industry back in the 1980s. The cool thing about this collection was he had multiple copies of almost every single book he owned. Stay tuned to the end for the best books in the collection. I'm announcing not just one, but two giveaways that we're going to be capping off our year with. First of all, we've got Spawn number 1 here. This is the prize for our 8,000 follower giveaway over on Instagram. So if you don't follow on Instagram, now is the time to go do so. I do all my claim sales there, and of course, you have a chance to win this book if you're a follower. I'll be posting later this week on Instagram about how to enter this giveaway, and then we've got this book right here. This is part of our YouTube giveaway. This is going to be for 2,500 YouTube subscribers, and this is Edge of Spider-Verse number 1, the 1 in 25 Ramos variant featuring Aranya, and it's a 9.8 white pages certified by CGC. If you want to win this book, all you have to do is subscribe to the YouTube channel that you're watching right now, like this video and leave a comment on it, and then check out our other videos that come out between now and us hitting that milestone of 2,500 subscribers. And every video that comes out between now and then, you can like and leave a comment on for an additional entry. So make sure you turn those notifications on so you know when another video is coming out, and you can get another entry to win this book right here. We're less than 200 subscribers away from hitting the goal for this book, and we're less than 100 followers away on Instagram from hitting this book. So the time period will be limited. Good luck. If you watched my video from last week recapping WinterCon, you might remember that I said I actually bought more comics than I sold at that convention, and I got a couple people's phone numbers that had potential collections that they wanted to sell. Well, this collection right here is one of them. This guy had taken my card, had reached out to me, and he had apparently reached out to pretty much all the other comic book dealers at this event, some of whom I know personally, and they let me know, hey, this guy reached out to me, and we spoke about it. Basically what happened was he got in contact with people. He took offers from a bunch of different people who he was potentially going to sell to, and it turned out that I ended up having the best offer. We'll talk about money at the end, but let's talk about this collection. As I mentioned before, this guy was a magazine distributor in the 1980s, and immediately when he told me that, the first thing I thought of was, okay, he's got newsstands. Magazine racks, things like that, they're always going to have the newsstand copy, as they are not comic book stores, and that is where you get the direct edition books. Now, 1980s, those books, the newsstands aren't crazy hard to find like they are books from the late 90s and especially the 2000s, but they still can hold some really nice value, even more than the direct edition, if they are very, very high grade. And that, reason being is they're being handled by people who aren't comic book collectors, aren't comic book store owners. A lot of newsstands were outside, whether they're on a rack outside or if it was an actual outdoor newsstand. Also, they're often looked through by kids while their parents are, shopping and stuff like that. So they were just generally not found in higher grades. So even pre-1986, and 1986 is the year where it's 50% newsstand and 50% direct edition as the print run, even pre-1986, if you have like a really high grade, I'm talking like the 9.8s, maybe the 9.6s, and probably not, but maybe the lower 9s, you're going to get a premium for a newsstand book, even though that they were more plentiful, just because there's not as many in high grade still. So that being said, I was pretty excited about this, thinking, okay, this is stuff that he has had for a long time. Maybe it's kept in good condition, and he did keep them in really nice shape. I will say every book was bagged, not a single book was boarded, and the bags were very, very old, which can, cause problems over time. I'm taking every book out of the bag that's not going into a dollar bin, and I'm going to rebag and board it. But yeah, anyway, that was like the first thing I thought of, like, okay, high grade, newsstand. He got multiple copies of every book, and he said to me that he mostly got number ones, thinking, okay, number ones, these might end up being worth the most, which in some circumstances that is the case if it is, a first appearance or something like that. But in other cases, it is certainly not. And in fact, other issues that he may have been able to get at the same time would actually be worth way, way more today. Anyway, let's get into it. Speaking of number ones, this book right here was one of the number ones that he picked up. This was Power Pack number 1. And this is the first appearance of Power Pack. I've mentioned a couple times, this might be a good book to hold on to because it is, it is a more kid-centric, kid-friendly superhero team. And, being that Disney owns Marvel and has Disney Plus as an option to do a series on, I think Power Pack could be something that they revisit. It is not a super well-known property, so they could really revamp it for the modern age. Now, I mentioned multiple copies, and I've got the number written on the back of all of them because I don't remember exactly how many, but there were 40 copies. Yes, I have that written on the back. 40 copies of this book that he had. 40 copies of Power Pack number 1. A lot of them high grade, very high grade, possible 9/8. I'm definitely going to be sending some of the books in that you're seeing today, sometimes multiple copies in to get graded if I think they can get the 9/8. This one, like I said, has some potential. I'm going to be selling off a lot of them. I'm certainly not going to be keeping all 40, but I'm definitely going to be keeping some to myself because it is a potential speculation book. Next, we've got Secret Wars number 2. Now, I said he got some number 1s. Secret Wars number 1, I'll tell you, it's in here, but it's going to be at the end with the more expensive books. This is Secret Wars number 2. It is not specifically, this is not number 2. This is 4. I apologize. There was no number 2 and number 3, which I found interesting. There were a couple copies of number 4. In fact, 24 of them. Not specifically a key or anything, but people mostly collect this whole run together. If you're not just collecting 1 or 8, it's really you're collecting the whole run, at least for most people. One of the best runs ever. Secret Wars is getting a movie, whether it's based on this or something else, still a great pickup. And to go along with that was Secret Wars number 5. There were only 6 copies of this, and unfortunately it did stop there. 6 and 7 are minor keys, and 8 is obviously the big one with that black suit origin. But I'll tell you right now, there were no Secret Wars number 8s. I told him, I was like, man, you stopped buying the Secret Wars too early, man. You could have gotten some good ones with the Secret Wars number 8. But hey, it is what it is. He had some good stuff, which we'll see in a little bit. Speaking of some pretty good stuff right here, Wolverines limited series, the Frank Miller 4-issue limited series, is one of the most sought after limited series ever, along with Secret Wars itself. Really, really popular, just one of the most immensely popular characters, with work by Frank Miller as well as Chris Claremont, and just some really, really intense, great covers. This is issue number 2. There were 9 of these, which now that is pretty solid. Interestingly enough, there were no issue number 3s. But there were issue number 4s, and if you saw my Instagram this morning, or, the morning of this video being posted, I did post a picture of me with all of the copies, or not of me, just of all the copies of Wolverine number 4. And yes, there were in fact 50 copies of this book. This was the most plentiful book in this collection with 50 copies. This is not like a super expensive book or anything, but it holds a little bit of value because it's part of this run. And again, just like Secret Wars, people collect the whole run. There are certainly, out of those 50, I have to assume there's some 9.8s that I'm going to be able to get in there. Just got to go through, take the time to look, and send some off to get graded. That being said, this is now the comic book that I own the most copies of. I believe this beats out what I had before. I had Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, number 1, that first cameo of Silk. I had 50-some copies. I sold a bunch of them, so I'm under 50 now. Now I have 50 of these, but I don't think they're going to last very long because this is definitely a hot character and a book that people like to buy. Next, we got G.I. Joe number 2. A bunch of first appearances here. I don't really remember because I'm not a big G.I. Joe guy. Anytime it's like G.I. Joe or Transformers, I have to look up what the keys are because there's so many characters and it's not a property that I'm super familiar with because I was born in 1990 rather than having been born in the 80s where I may have been more into this. But hey, it is what it is. G.I. Joe number 2, second G.I. Joe book. couple of first appearances, really high grade newsstand. Oh, by the way, there were 14 of these, and you'll notice there's a lot of like 9s, 14s, 19, and 24s, because this guy actually kept one copy of almost every book. Think about it. He just wanted to keep one copy for himself, and he had bought 20 copies or 15 or 10, mostly bought in those 5 increments. And he kept one for himself. So I ended up with a weird number of them, but hey, it is what it is. Speaking of, there were 9 of these. We're getting into the number one, first appearance in a solo story stuff here. There were a lot of these books. This one is Galactus, The Origin. Really fantastic cover. Great book. Surprisingly not super expensive. I would think this book would be more expensive, but 9.8s are and raw copies are, but once you get below the 9.8, they're not actually that expensive. So some of these are going to be sent in, but this might be sent in as a pre-screen to try to get that 9.8, and I might just sell it raw otherwise. We're going to kind of have to do a lot of thinking on this collection, a lot of looking up numbers and seeing what is worth sending out and what stuff should just be sold raw, because selling stuff raw, you're going to get less for it, but it'll move quicker. So gives other people the opportunity to possibly get it graded. And, if they're a cleaner presser themselves, maybe they'll get a really nice grade on that. Another number one first solo. This is Iceman. This is a 4-issue limited series. There was only the number ones in there, but this is really the one you want. First solo Iceman. This is another one of those books that like sneaky valuable 9.8, but then below the 9.8 is not super coveted. So again, this might be one that goes in for the pre-screen. There were 9 of these as well. Then we've got The Thing number 1. This is again the first solo Thing book, and this is one of 19 copies again. He bought 20 of these, kept one for himself, and Thing has not come to the MCU yet, but I could see him becoming a more popular character, kind of a comic relief, lovable character, similar to Groot, how Groot is, but, this guy actually talks and stuff like that, so you can do a lot more with him. Either way, great book, great first solo and stuff like that, and same with this one. Hawkeye, number 1, character that not only has been in the MCU, but is still in the MCU, may continue. I think that Jeremy Renner is going to continue along as more of a leadership role or a mentorship role to some of the younger superheroes, as well as, probably going to get more of a glimpse into his family life. Now, there were 24 of this book. Wish I had these obviously leading up to last December when Hawkeye the show came out, because these were selling for a lot more at that time. I think they were selling for like $20, $25. That being said, they still have some value to them. First Hawkeye solo, can't really go wrong with that. Then we've got the first Indiana Jones in comics, Raiders of the Lost Ark, number 1. The next bunch is all going to be movie-related stuff. There were 13 of these. The guy probably bought 15 and then ended up keeping 2 instead of keeping 1. I'm not sure why. He also said that he did give some to relatives, so maybe this is one of the books that he gave to a relative who likes that. And to go along with it, there were 14 copies of Indiana Jones Temple of Doom number 1. These aren't specifically worth a ton. The Temple of Doom one, the Raiders of the Lost Ark one definitely has more value, but still, people love Temple of Doom, and Harrison Ford's coming back. There's going to be a new Indiana Jones movie pretty soon, I think in the next year. Then we got A-Team, first appearance of Mr. T and the A-Team in comic books. This is a 3-issue limited series, but again, there were just the number ones, just the first appearance. And once again, just like a lot of these books, the 9.8, really nice value-wise, but it drops down significantly if they don't get the 9.8. So this one might, again, be something that I pre-screen. Then we got Blade Runner, another Harrison Ford property. This guy was, bigger than the world in the 1980s, between Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and his other projects. I love this movie. I definitely would love to get one of these as a 9.8. I think there were 9 of them. There were 9 of them. So I might try to see if one of them I think has some potential to get that 9.8, and, might end up sending 1 or 2 in and see if I can get that for myself, because I do really love Blade Runner. Then we got Dragon Slayer. This is a lesser known 80s film. And there were 29 copies of this book, though. This does still have some value. It is, you know, a kind of a cult classic in the fantasy world. You know, it's something that people do buy. I've sold copies of this book before. And again, all these are high-grade newsstands. I don't know about having 29 of them. I'd rather have 29 of the Indiana Jones book or Blade Runner. But hey, it is what it is. I can't complain about this collection. Now, these next ones. This is Star Wars 1, 2, 3, and 4. But you're going to always want to look at the top here because this is the reprint. You see it says reprint right there in blue next to Luke. Actually, I'll probably just hold it like, wait, that's upside down. I'm doing this all wrong. There we go. You can see the word reprint right up at the top. This is the reprint. The guy, unfortunately, did think he had the originals, and I was kind of scratching my head over it when he mentioned that he had Star Wars because he said everything was from the 80s, and I was like, it's probably the reprints. I don't know. It ended up being, you know, the reprints. Unfortunately, not worth nearly as much, but he did have all 4 of the first issues, so I'll probably just bundle these together in my next claim sale and sell them as a lot. You know, if someone wants high grade, nice looking copies, but the reprints, you know, much more affordable, you know, kind of like getting a facsimile edition. All right, we're on to the good stuff now. You saw this book in the beginning. This is Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, number 1. This is the first appearance in comic books of Firestar. She has what I've mentioned on the channel many times as Harley Quinn syndrome, meaning that she first appeared in a television show, specifically Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and then she was later incorporated into the comic books, not only in this book initially, but then her second appearance is in an X-Men book, X-Men number 193, and she becomes a member of that team and is utilized, you know, here and there over the years. I grew up watching the crap out of reruns from this show. This show was early 80s, but even in the 90s, I was watching the show reruns, and I had like VHSs of episodes and stuff. So this is super nostalgic for me. I have a couple copies in my personal collection, but honestly, I got 19 of them here, and I'm definitely going to be sending some off because the 9.8 that I could potentially get out of these copies, high grade 9.8 newsstand copies, have been selling for between $350 and $500, with a couple sales even more than that. But you know, that's of recently too. That's after the decline of the comic market. I think this book was selling for $1,000+ during, you know, the height of the market last year in a 9.8. So I'm hoping, I got 19 copies here. I'm hoping that there are 1, 2, 9.8s. I'd be happy. 3, 4, I'd be ecstatic. Any more than that, I am just like blown away. Definitely going to be keeping a 9.8, which fingers crossed that I get at least one for my personal collection. But it's definitely going to be grading some of these, but also selling some raw because there are some that I saw, you know, had spine ticks and stuff like that. Moving on, we got, you guessed it, Secret Wars 1. There, you know, we saw Secret Wars, what was it, 4 and 5 earlier. And I did mention he bought a lot of number 1s, and there were 19 of these. So he'd bought 20 originally. This is not a key in the sense that it's not like a first appearance or anything, but it is the first book of one of the most monumental limited series ever. Secret Wars, a giant crossover event, the first of for Marvel, and you know, it sells itself. You know, Secret Wars, huge, people grab it, whether it's for the black suit or for the storyline, and there's, you know, obviously the Secret Wars movie that's coming out in just a few years. Again, I would love to get a 9.8, but I did look at most of these, and they do seem to all have, or most of them have, at least one spine tick in them. There's a little overhang on this black cover, and it's very, very easy to see spine ticks on that black part. So fingers crossed for me that I can squeak out one 9.8, but I will certainly be keeping that for myself if I do get it. Most of these will probably be sold as high-grade raw copies, so look out for them in future claim sales. Then we've got this book right here, G.I. Joe numero uno. This is the first appearance of G.I. Joe, the G.I. Joe team in comics. By the way, I recently found out that G.I. Joe is not a character. I thought there was a character whose name was G.I. Joe. I thought he was the leader of the G.I. Joe team. I did not realize... This is going to sound so ridiculous. I never watched any G.I. Joe as a kid. I wasn't into the action figures. I was like solely into superheroes and Magic the Gathering and then Pokemon when it came along. So I wasn't like into like the army and the war stuff and the whatever. But yeah, anyway, recently found that out. This is G.I. Joe #1, high grade, newsstand. Now, this book has some serious potential again because 9.8s sell for over $1,000. And in some cases, I've even seen over $1,500. That is the newsstand, of course, which all of these are. And there were 9 of them, 9 G.I. Joe #1s. Yeah, can't go wrong with that. They all look really nice. One, I did notice a bindery tear. I have not gone through these yet with a fine tooth comb to check to see, if there's any problems that I think will keep it from a 9.8. But man, imagine if even just one 9.8 comes out of this batch. That's, I should be able to do very, very well right there. Last but not least, you saw it on the back. There's 18 copies of this book right here. Yup. 18 copies of Wolverine #1. Kind of falls into the same price category as the G.I. Joe #1 as far as newsstands go. Over $1,000 for 9.8 newsstands. The G.I. Joe one probably is a little bit more valuable, but I had only 9 of those where I had 18 of these. So I put this one last because it was probably the thing that I was most excited about. This is a book that, I've gotten this in collections before, and I've been like, woo, I got a Wolverine #1 in a collection, just one copy. There were 18 in here. Whew. Extremely excited about this. Again, some of them will be, shipped off to get graded. Other ones will be sold raw, so look out for that. Certainly, if I get at least one 9.8, it is staying in my personal collection. Otherwise, they're going to be up for grabs. And honestly, this book, even in a 9.6, 9.4, 9.2, and probably down to a 9.0, is worth grading. Same with the G.I. Joe one. Those two and those two alone are worth grading at less than a 9.6. Those are the only 2 books that I'm going to send in and not put a pre-screen on at 9.8 or 9.6. So hopefully, fingers crossed, some of these get the 9.8. 9.6, 9.4 I'd be happy with. I've seen some little issues, but anyway, let's talk about dollars and cents. So this guy, I had to kind of feel him out. Like I kind of had to make a good offer, an offer that I thought was going to catch this guy's attention, but I also didn't want to overpay on it. And, I'm taking a lot of risk because a lot of the value that will come from this will come from grading these books, which, I have to put more time in. I have to put more money into. And if I don't get the grade, do I lose money or do I, kind of break even on it or something like that and just lose the time? So I gave this guy a number and thinking, okay, maybe if there's a higher offer already, and he had fielded some offers, he told me, and he said he had laughed one of them off. One of them was not a good offer. And he said he got one offer that was really good. And I was like, all right, well, I want to offer something that is good and shows me as someone who is an interested buyer for real. But I also didn't want to put all my cards on the table and, put in a big offer. So with all these books raw, and of course there's a lot of other stuff, but it's mostly going to go in the dollar bins. There were 800 books in total. What you saw today obviously is probably close to half of that, something like that with all the different copies. But nonetheless, about half of it or a little bit more than half is like more bulk stuff. But I offered $1,250. He accepted on the spot and handed me the books. I later found out that the highest offer that he had so far before me was $1,000 on the dot. So I ended up paying 25% more than that offer, which probably was what put me not just over the edge, but over the edge in such a way that it was like on the spot he accepted it. If I had offered, 1,100, maybe he would have been like, oh, I'll talk to the other guy and maybe we go back and forth a little bit. This was on the spot. He extended his hand, $1,250. He was happy with that. He spent pennies, less than $1 on each of these books as a distributor in the 80s, back when, the most expensive book in here is probably a cover price of $1. No, I guess the G.I. Joe one's a thick book, so that was like $1.50. But nonetheless, I'm sure he spent less than $1 on it as a distributor. So he made his money on it. But at the same time, I'm going to come out on top on this one. Fingers crossed that the grades are good. This has a potential of being a really, really good score. Certainly multiple thousands. But again, it's going to take some time. It's going to take combing through these books, finding 9.8 potentials, pressing and cleaning them, sending them off to CGC, paying for those grading fees, and then getting them back, and then at that point having to sell them. So a lot of work is going to go into it. It is not super simple, and I'll tell you, every book being bagged and being in bags from the 80s that are sticky and the tape is like deteriorating and gross on it, it's going to be a lot of work just to get all this stuff rebagged and boarded. And you'll see I don't have these taped down. I had someone ask this recently, why don't you tape newer collections down? This is so you can take them out of the bag really easily and, figure out the grade or see if they're potential for submissions. I just usually put them in without taping it down at first, and then when it's time to sell them, I'll go and tape them down. Anyway, I am babbling. This video is going long enough. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go follow over on Instagram. I'll be doing a bunch of sales coming up around the holiday season. I don't have any shows booked until March, so most of my selling is going to be on Instagram, as it has been pretty much every Friday and usually one other night of the week for a while. But yeah, join me there. See you here next time. Make sure you turn those notifications on. And until next time, turn the page, wash your hands.